Bleeding purple and gold. From the heart of Los Angeles, this is the LakersNation.com podcast with your host, Trevor Lane.
Welcome to today's show. As always, we are powered by LakersNation.com and CLNS Media. Now, for today's show, we've got plenty to talk about. We've brought in Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report, Basketball Insiders, and the Hollywood Hoops podcast to talk a bit about what's going on with the Lakers as we're getting closer to the trade deadline. Eric, thanks so much for hopping on here.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Trevor.
So you recently wrote a piece for Bleacher Report about the Lakers potentially pursuing DeMarcus Cousins and Paul George because there's been word that LeBron James may not be all that likely of an option for them. And you even addressed possibly adding them at the trade deadline. Can you tell us a little bit about that and kind of what the rationale would be there?
Well, I think plan A is still LeBron James, and that's probably going to be plan A until LeBron says no. So I don't think they'll do anything that gets in the way of that. But that said, at the deadline, there are two targets that they could look at. I don't think they would get both. But Paul George with the Oklahoma City Thunder, they've been struggling over the last 10 or so games, though they've sort of figured it out. They've been climbing in the standings. So I think he may be more of a long shot. I don't think the Thunder bail out on Paul George and Carmelo and Russell Westbrook, and they try to make a playoff run. But there's a real chance that Paul George opts out and leaves. And I think they are aware of that, and they have to be cognizant of that and try to gauge the temperature before the deadline. But the fact that they're starting to pull it together, I think, suggests they would stick with what they're doing. But the Pelicans are a different story because they're just at about 500. They've won a couple or so, and they're playing a little bit better. They're getting healthier, and maybe they climb. But if they don't climb, they're looking at DeMarcus Cousins. And the challenge there, they don't have any real means to replace DeMarcus Cousins. It'll be Anthony Davis and no cap room, so they'll have about $8.5 million to spend to try to get another piece. But you're not going to replace DeMarcus Cousins with that. You got to get lucky in trade or the draft. And really, the Pelicans don't have a lot to offer in trade other than Anthony Davis, and they clearly don't want to move him. So if they struggle, I mean, obviously if they start winning and they climb just like the Thunder are, maybe that goes out the window. But as they get closer to February 8th, the trade deadline, you have to wonder, do they want to replace Cousins? And if they do, because they don't want to lose him for nothing, if they could get two starters for him, like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Julius Randle, both guys who they can have leverage on in that the market will probably be about $8.5 million, the mid-level for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope this summer, and Randle. Really, there aren't a lot of teams with cap room, so that's really going to be the going rate. They'd have the ability to overpay those guys, not a lot, but they've paid them 11, 12, a reasonable chance to keep them. You're replacing DeMarcus Cousins, who you might lose for nothing, with two legit starters, and maybe you throw in a Zubats or some draft considerations. Maybe you go crazy and include Ashik and Deng and do some bigger giant trade. I just think there's a lot of fertile territory if those two teams decide to trade. But clearly that would be on the Pelicans. But Randle, KCP, I don't know if they figure into the Lakers' future plans. So they're not really giving up anything that would get in the way of chasing after Paul George to add to DeMarcus Cousins in July or, as I said, plan A. And then there's a slight advantage in that DeMarcus Cousins has a cap hold, which is the amount that he takes up as a free agent. He would take up about $27 million, and then the Lakers could pay him $30 million this summer. So they would actually gain an extra $3 million in spending power this summer, which would go towards chasing, like I said, LeBron or Paul George, and that might help them keep Jordan Clarkson in the mix. So just a lot of math, but something to keep an eye on. And if you're a Lakers fan and you want any of these things to happen, you probably want to root for the Pelicans and the Thunder to just completely plummet in the standings.
So from the Lakers' perspective, it would appear that would be almost a no-brainer to make a move like that, because then you're giving up pieces that you probably weren't going to be keeping anyway. You're getting, say, DeMarcus Cousins in to give him a look at your organization and kind of bring him into the fold a few months early before free agency even opens up. and you're giving yourself more money to play with in the summer so that you can chase after a Paul George or a LeBron James and say, look, we already have DeMarcus Cousins here. Come play with him. He can tell you about how great the organization has been and all of that. So is that something you expect to see Magic Johnson and Rob Pelinka realistically pursue as we get closer to the deadline here?
Well, I don't think they're going to give up anything of true value that for someone they believe they have a shot at in free agency. So if they really believe that Paul George is going to come, you don't trade Ingram, you don't trade Ball, you don't trade Kuzma. You consider a first if it's the right, with protections. But they can't trade a first for a while anyway, so maybe a first, but you really wouldn't give up a lot. But that said, if you're giving up Randle, who Adrian Wojnarowski has reported they shopped or at least discussed with Dallas in a trade for Nerlens Noel. Nothing came of it. If you're going to move him anyway, if you're not planning on keeping him, they've relegated him to the bench. I think he's been really good this year off the bench, but I don't think Randle believes he's a backup center, although I kind of believe he's a backup center in this league. Yeah. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what Luke thinks. If Luke is right, it matters what the player thinks when he goes and hits free agency and is looking for a fit that matches what they want. Reality of who they are doesn't matter it's where do they stand in their shoes. And Randle would like to start, and he believes he's a power forward. So, and then the case of KCP, that one's a little trickier because, and I talked about this yesterday on our Hollywood Hoops podcast. If you kind of look at the tea leaves a little bit, and maybe I'm overthinking here, but KCP seems to get like every clutch opportunity he's making like 1 out of 8 of them or so. I'm just making up a number, but it seems like that. And he's a Rich Paul client, right? Which is a LeBron James client, rather LeBron James agent. Although maybe that's correct. Maybe Rich Paul is a LeBron James
you
client.
may have been right there.
And then they're going after Noel. In theory, I don't know the full story on that. Maybe Dallas approached the Lakers and they said, no, we don't want Noel. So I can't say that outright. But let's say that they did inquire about Noel. Now you're talking about another Rich Paul client. And there was a rumor, and I forget who said it in a podcast or wrote it in a story, that the Lakers had a plan of adding Noel and LeBron together next summer. And some people said, like, what? Why Noel? But it's all about Rich Paul. So in theory, they're really trying to play up the LeBron James, Rich Paul relationship and try to get something going there. So maybe KCP is 100% on the we won't trade him list simply because of the LeBron James connection. That may be a very real thing. I'm making it up, but there's a real possibility it's true. And then if you look at it conversely, Aaron Mintz is the agent of D'Angelo Russell. They traded him. He was not really happy that they gave up on him. They put Julius Randle on the bench, and they've had all the static, and they've shopped him. He's an Aaron Mintz client, and Paul George is an Aaron Mintz client with CAA. So in a sense, they're completely, arguably kissing up to Rich Paul and really doing things to Aaron Mintz's clients that are unpleasant or what they are unhappy about anyway. So I wonder where the Lakers' priorities are. It may be that they just flat out are in the LeBron James mix more on their side. Who knows what LeBron's doing? And maybe Paul George, they're just either taking for granted that he wants to come or he's not as important, perhaps, to kiss up to his agent in the same way. Just a thought.
How big of a factor do you think all of that is with the agents and all that kind of other stuff behind the scenes? Is that something that the Lakers are consciously thinking about when they're making these moves or considering these moves, or do you think it's more they just happen to really like KCP and think that he can hit shots in the clutch? I mean, where does the line get drawn there?
Well, it's hard to say. How much does management talk to Luke about what they want in the future? And I don't know the answer to that. And that's the sort of thing that Luke's not going to really talk about. Even if you asked him directly, he'll say, oh, well, we talk all the time and we talk, but you won't get like a straight, clear answer because the coach isn't going to say that. And Magic and Rob are going to say, we let our coach because that's what all GMs say and that's what all coaches say. So you're not going to get a straight answer. I would have to really dig in and see if there's someone in the organization who would tell me in an unofficial capacity. And to date, I haven't really pushed that angle. But I wonder as well. And I do know that coaches know the plans to a degree of what they're trying to do. Brandon Ingram is getting minutes, pass or fail. Like they're letting him go through things. And last year he was, once they started him, they stuck with him, and he struggled at times, and this year he's struggled at times, and they're fine with it, and they're letting him have that rope. Obviously, they're playing Kuzma 40-something minutes in certain games, but he's earning it, and there's no way you can look at Kuzma in the way he's playing and say he doesn't deserve that. Right. But they're not giving the same opportunity and the same minutes to the other players, and you could say it's production-based, and it probably is. And it may be just rotation, Luke looking at the rotation, and I agree in concept with a lot of what he's done. I don't agree with all of it, but I like the idea of having how it originally was, where you had 3 scorers on the bench in Randle, Clarkson, and Kuzma, and then you finish the game with the best combination. I didn't like the starting lineup because I thought they had some real shooting and spacing problems with Nance and Lopez. Yeah. But I got the concept that the Lakers were probably a better team over 48 minutes because they weren't as good over the first 4 or 5 minutes of a game and the first 4 or 5 minutes of the second half. They're better for a total of 48 minutes. I get the idea. I don't know if it was perfect how it was, but I understood it. And you have to wonder what chances are being given to Randle, where everyone started almost except Randle, and even Clarkson started the other day. Are these decisions that are made because he's not in their plans, and maybe he feels that, and maybe there's some, Andrew Bogut made some comments that some of the players are, having a hard time because of the max plan. He didn't say it in those words, but the max plan that we've all talked about. Mm-hmm. But it's not me and you. Luke sort of blamed, in a sense. I don't think he blamed, but he pointed at the media and what the guys are reading. But it was Magic and Rob who kept hammering 2 max stuff. Usually that's my job, right? I'm the one who's gonna speculate and say, hey, the Lakers can get two max slots, but it shouldn't. You didn't hear Mitch Kupchak to a degree, although even he did it to a degree, but not the same degree. Where Magic and Rob, it was like a mantra. And the fact is that they don't have 2 max slots yet. They would have to make difficult decisions that probably include Randle, probably include Deng, if they can find a way out of Deng. And we could talk about how a little bit later. And then, Clarkson, they would have to trade. Probably 2 of 3, if not 3 of these, 3 of those guys have to go. And I'm writing about it. Other people are writing about it. People are talking about it. And these young guys they're not stupid. They're intelligent young men who maybe they don't understand the business of basketball as much as someone like I might, because of all the years I spent doing it. And but certainly some players do, like Chris Paul does, and there are guys who have been around the business long enough to understand how it works. But I don't think they understand it on the nuances, but I think they understand the big picture. And there's a real chance they're not a part of it, and that's going to impact them.
Sure. And if you look at this whole situation, just to talk about Randle for a moment, if you look at it from his perspective, you can totally understand why he would be so frustrated. I mean, he spent his summer getting into tremendous physical shape so that he can play more minutes at a high level. That was the big complaint about him, was that he didn't have a gas tank that would allow him to play major minutes and play at a high intensity, high energy level. And so he spent his summer getting into shape so that he can do that. And now he's playing less minutes than he did last season. He's asked to play a completely different role as a backup center. And, I mean, he's playing really, really well. He's been one of the best players on the team. Statistically, he's been the best center on the team. And yet, as you mentioned, he isn't starting. Now, I don't think this is much of a factor, but you would know here. There is a small benefit to Randle coming off the bench in terms of his qualifying offer. It's actually lower if he comes off the bench than if he is a starter. I don't think that's that much of a factor because I don't think it's that relevant. Do you see that being a factor at all in the Lakers' decision-making process?
Yeah, you're talking about the starter criteria for the qualifying offer. Now, yes. It's important to know, that ultimately his cap hold is the same regardless. So he's going to take up $12.4 million as a free agent, as a restricted free agent. So whether they give him a qualifying offer of it's not even a huge difference, but let's say I have to look up the exact figure this year because it adjusts every year. His qualifying offer is 5.5 or 5.6 right now. I think it would drop. I'd have to, just off the top of my head, let's say it's 4. Let's say it's 4 or 5.
It's 4 something.
Right. So, and I'm not looking at it. So, it would save them in theory $1 million, only if he accepted the qualifying offer. So, when restricted free agents accept the qualifying offer, which it would actually be the best case scenario, in my opinion, if Randle accepts the qualifying offer and stays for $5 million, 5.5, whatever, that's how much he takes up once he signs that offer. That's how much cap space he takes up. It's his salary. Unsigned, he's 12.4 regardless. But most restricted free agents, they explore the market and they push, and they usually have to wait, and then they finally get an offer from someone, or maybe they don't. Like Alex Len, he took the qualifying offer really late for the Phoenix Suns. Historically, if a player takes a qualifying offer, it happens in August or September, whereas these big decisions that are going to be made by the top free agents are probably going to be in the first 5 to 7 days of free agency, if not sooner. So maybe by July 5th to July 7th, maybe someone takes a long time, July 10th. I mean, that's pushing it. So the Lakers wouldn't get that extra benefit of $1 million in cap room if Julius Randle takes the qualifying offer in August, when they have to make these difficult moves in July. So I don't think it's really necessarily a relevant thing. I know a lot of people have asked me about it, and just looking at the starts, if he doesn't start, I think 41 games, and I'm not looking at the exact criteria. Pretty sure it's 41. Right now he's at 0, but they would take the average over the 2 years, the last 2 years. So he started 73. So if he doesn't start, he will be under that. But they also take a look at the minutes, and he played. Let's see, he played 74 games last year. He did 2,131 minutes last year. I would say he's on track for also not qualifying based on minutes. It's 2,000 minutes averaged over either in one season or averaged over 2. And right now it looks like he did. It depends if he plays 82 games. It's conceivable. Let's see, 32 times 22.3. He's at 713 minutes so far with 50 games left. There's a reasonable chance he won't qualify as a starter. So if he doesn't, it impacts their qualifying offer. But does it really matter? I mean, it could, and it could help. And if he wanted to play ball, but I guess you could argue, let's say Aaron Mintz and the Lakers get in bed together, and Paul George comes, and Aaron Mintz says, sure, we'll help everybody out. Julius will take the qualifying offer. Then, yeah, it could help them. But as I kind of said earlier, feels like all they're doing is irritating Aaron Mintz, not really building up that kind of positive relationship.
Absolutely. And it seems like Julius Randle probably wants to go somewhere else. I mean, as you mentioned, he sees himself as a starting power forward and not a backup center, even though he has been playing really well at that position. One other thing that I want to clarify that I've been seeing quite a bit online is that people are saying, well, what's going to happen is at the beginning of free agency, some team is going to know that the Lakers have to wait to get a decision from LeBron James or Paul George, and they're going to throw an offer at Julius Randle and try to make the Lakers just let him go because he's going to be restricted. But there's a few things at play here. First of all, there's not that much cap space out there. And then here, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on this. Free agency may begin on July 1st, but contracts can actually be signed until July 6th. And so then the Lakers' 3-day counter for them or timer to determine whether or not they actually match that offer would start on July 6th, and they would in theory have until July 9th. So it's not like Julius Randle gets tossed an offer at 12:01 Mozgov style or anything like that on July 1st, and then the Lakers suddenly have to make a decision. They would actually have almost a week and a half before they would have to figure anything out with Randle's contract or make a decision on whether or not to match. Is that all right? Am I reading that the right way?
Yeah. I want to make sure it's not. Did they change it? I have to check. I mean, they changed the rules so much. I want to make sure it's not 48 hours. It's either 72 or 48. I want to double check that. It's been 72 historically. So
either way, we're looking at July 8th or July 9th before they have to really. So ideally, they would have heard from LeBron or Paul George or somebody by that point, right?
Right. There was talk during the negotiation, and there were rumors that they would start the clock on the 1st of, like, if someone signed July 1st, a qualifying, an offer sheet, that they would start the clock. But that ultimately isn't what they did. And so, what we've seen is, and this happened with KCP, is a team will pull their qualifying offer and make the player unrestricted. If they're really worried about that, they don't have to issue the qualifying offer. They can let him go unrestricted, and then it's a non-issue. Or they could just decide, okay, we won't match that offer. And then again, as you pointed out correctly, there are not a lot of teams with cap room. So the offer that Randle would probably get in that window of time would be a team's mid-level of roughly $8.5 million starting. Let's say a 4-year deal. I don't know if the Lakers would match that or not. But if they did match that, that would actually open up cap room, because unsigned he's 12.5, right. Signed at 8.5, he's 8.5. So they would actually save $4 million. And so there's a lot of ways to look at it where maybe Randle signing an offer with someone else and them matching is the best choice, because it doesn't really matter what Randle ultimately wants. In restricted free agency, it's up to the team, and they may value him. I mean, as we talked about, it sounds like they don't on the same level as he would like. And I think he would love to stay if he was able to do the role that he wanted to do and get the money he wanted to get. You know, he's got his family here. He's got a kid now. There's a lot to be said for staying a Laker, and I'm sure that if they paid him right and gave him the role that he wanted, the minute he wanted, he'd love to stay. But right now, it just doesn't feel like that's happening. But he's super valuable for the team with what he does. And I would argue the reason he is so valuable, the reason he is so efficient this year, is because he's playing up against second-line guys, and he is in so much better shape so that he can really go full bore, and he's going shorter minutes, so he has even more energy to go full bore. So you're able to see him play a level of defense he has never played in his career, probably in his life, to be honest, because
right.
He didn't play this level of defense in Kentucky, certainly not as a Laker, and I doubt he played any sort of defense when he was a kid, because at that level, you really don't. When you're Julius Randle and playing against other non-NBA players, and that was a shock for him when he got to the NBA and was playing against grown men who were bigger than him, and he was about as strong as anybody. But he's had a great year, and I think part of that is the role. But like I said, it doesn't matter the reality. The reality is, for him, what he believes and what he wants and the decisions he makes. But then again, he is restricted, and none of that may matter in the end. Depends on the Lakers and how they want to handle it.
Certainly. And you know what, if your numbers are right there, and Randle signs a 4-year, $8.5 million deal, I would have to think that that's a pretty good value for him. I mean, that I would think that would be a number that the Lakers would like to hang on to, but we'll see. It's going to be a fascinating story to watch unfold, to see what happens here with Randle. Before we wrap up here, Eric, you know, it was a few weeks ago, maybe it was even a month ago, you put out an idea. And I thought this was just brilliant, because the Lakers have been, or the big topic around the Lakers has been, what are they going to do with Luol Deng? I mean, we're starting to hear that they're not able to find a taker via trade, that teams are wanting multiple first-round picks. They're wanting one of Brandon Ingram or Kyle Kuzma or Lonzo Ball, which they're not willing to part with those things. So trying to find a new home for Luol Deng is very difficult, and so that means that this stretch option might become the way that they go. And you put out this interesting idea of, rather than just stretching him, actually extending his contract and then stretching him. And at first glance, when you first read that headline, you just think, what? That can't be right. Why would you extend Luol Deng's contract? But then when you read it, it's actually extremely, extremely insightful. So can you explain a little bit about what that strategy would entail? And if you've heard anything about how realistic it is, would the NBA even allow the Lakers to do something like that?
Well, that's kind of the question. And the basic idea of it is that they can stretch Luol Deng this summer, period. And so he has 2 years left at about, call it $37 million. And so they can stretch that $37 million over 5 years. And let's say it's about 7.5-ish per year. So for 5 years, you're giving away $7.5 million in cap room, which is definitely an option for the Lakers. It may even be the most likely option. And so instead of paying him $17 million-ish, you're paying him $7.5 this next year. So it opens up about $10 million in cap room. So that's a possible tool that they use to get to the max money to give two max guys, that and probably losing Jordan Clarkson and Julius Randle. But that said, my thought on it was they changed the rules of extension so that you can sign an extension a little bit earlier than you used to in the previous CBA. So Randle will be eligible for an extension this year, and there's no rule that says an extension has to have guaranteed money. So let's say they extended him for 3 years at doesn't even matter the number, right? Because you guarantee zero. If you were to then say, well, now he has a 5-year contract, and so if you stretch a 5-year contract, it's 2 times plus 1, so that's 11 years. And so now that number drops down, instead of about 7.5, let's call it 3.5. I'm very loose numbers here, but just the idea of it. So they would save an additional $4 million in cap room, and it would cost them nothing to do so. But then you ask the question, would the league allow that? And there's like a general prohibition clause where they can declare anything they want circumvention. If they feel like a team is breaking the rules through a loophole, they can just say, you know what, that's pushing it too far. But if they were to give him an extension that was fully guaranteed, there's no reason at that point, even if they cut him, where they're paying millions and millions of dollars, they would allow that to go through. There's a line somewhere in the sand where, let's say they gave him $3 million more or $6 million more. So in other words, it would be a partial guarantee. So let's say you give him like a $30 million extension, of which six is guaranteed total. Now you stretch that amount, and those numbers could creep up to $3.5 million. Even if the Lakers were paying $4 million per year over 11 years, it's kind of like the Bobby Bonilla concept. If you follow baseball at all, he's still getting money. I think from the Mets.
For like 25 years or something like that.
Right. So it's the idea of taking advantage of the rules. There's a loophole there. If you probably have to guarantee him some, also because from an individual perspective, it's better to have money in your hand than it is to spread it out over time, because then you can invest it, and he's making so much that it's all at the the highest tax rates. So there has to be a reason why Luol Deng would defer that money. So they have to pay him something, and some would say it's not enough, and some $1 million per year is not enough. Some would say it's fine. It depends on is he expecting a 2% rate of return or a 20% rate of return on his own individual investments. I don't know what kind of money Luol Deng makes, but I do know the league withholds some money, that there's plenty of taxes, especially with the new tax laws. He is only going to take home about, let's say, half of whatever his gross is, maybe a little bit more, but let's say it's half of of whatever money he's going to make. So you look at the net and what he might make, and the Lakers would have to negotiate with Deng. They would have to negotiate with the league to make sure it's legal, and it's a theoretical way of opening up $3 to $4 million more in spending power. And if you do that sort of thing, and if you were able to trade for DeMarcus Cousins earlier, tying together our earlier conversation, it becomes really feasible to keep a guy like Jordan Clarkson, or and if you trade Jordan Clarkson instead of Randle, it's feasible to keep Randle. I'm not saying I don't think the Pelicans would want Clarkson and KCP, but there's all kind. And maybe if we go back to the concept of the LeBron James thing, maybe they trade Clarkson with Randle to the Pelicans, assuming that the Pelicans were interested, and keep KCP, and then we're kind of tying everything together. Maybe they are kissing the ring, so to speak, with Rich Paul and LeBron James, and keep KCP instead of Clarkson, which I would rather have Clarkson personally when you're talking about on the court talent.
Right.
But maybe he's the guy who goes out. Maybe that's someone who appeals more to the Pelicans. He's under contract. He's got a reasonable contract. And then they're able to still go after LeBron and find a way to keep KCP. And maybe Rich Paul, because they're doing certain favors, is able to work certain favors for them. So, obviously that'd be up to LeBron more than Rich Paul. But just tying it all together, they have some flexibility. I think they've overplayed their hand just a little bit, and I think it's seeping into the locker room. And it's unfortunate, but it's reality. This is a business, and the Lakers are not a championship caliber team, and they're trying to figure out how to get there. And I don't think everyone on the roster right now is going to be there if and when the Lakers get back on top.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be impossible for them to keep this entire team together and assume that it's just going to grow into a championship team. There's going to be changes that are going to have to be made here. Now, when your article came out about this whole Deng thing, extending him and then stretching him, a lot of people said, well, wait, why would they want to be paying Luol Deng 10 years from now, 11 years from now? Why do they want that still on the books? But I think one thing that people are overlooking is that we can't assume that the salary cap is going to stay where it's at right now. So he may be, if you follow through with your plan, maybe he's taking up 3% of the salary cap today, but 7 years from now, 8 years from now, that $3 million hit or $4 million hit will look, even lighter in the future as the salary cap continues to grow. So I think that's a factor that we have to keep in mind here too, where, yeah, on the surface, it seems like not a good thing to be paying Luol Deng 10 years from now, but the amount of cap space he'd be taking up theoretically should be less than it is today, which would be something to factor in.
If you say it's 2 to 4% of the cap, that is not a lot at all, because the cap is ridiculous compared to what, like $4 million. If you go back when the cap was 50-something million, that's a bigger number. That's a bigger chunk. And I think, it depends on, I don't know how the Lakers look at it. I know that some NBA executives look at contracts by percentage of cap, and they don't look at it as the number itself. Like, the number doesn't matter. It's this player's taking up 20%, this player's taking up 5%, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really not a lot of money. And whose money is it? It's the Buss family's money. It's if you're a fan, it's like a theoretical, no, they shouldn't be doing that. But let's be real, it's not your money, and it may not impact them negatively at all. And the truth is that once they get over the cap, let's say that the Lakers spend this summer and they get 1 or 2 max guys, and now they've got for the next 4 years let's say they get Paul George and they have him for 4 years after this. They're very unlikely to be under the cap at all over that period of time. So an extra however much, $4 or $5 million, $3 million spent in cap space doesn't even matter. Now, it might put them into tax territory, but then again, the Lakers are not going to be that limited there are some limitations to being over the tax. But if the Lakers are really going for it and are a playoff team, they're probably going to get into the tax. And I just don't see it as significant. It's only significant from a purist, idealistic point of view. From a reality, it's just not that significant.
Right. And from Luol Deng's point of view, not only would he be making a little bit more money, but he'd also be getting himself his freedom from the Lakers. I mean, he'd be able to go sign with another team if they were to waive and stretch him, which would allow him to continue his career, because it doesn't appear that he's going to be seeing any minutes from the Lakers anytime soon.
Right. And I don't know how many years he has left in the NBA. I would think that next year he would get at least, call it $2.5 million minimum salary somewhere to be a vet, to play, whether he plays or not. I think there's a job for him out there. Guys age out and it gets harder and harder. But with two-way contracts, I think that opens up an opportunity. I think there are more roster spots now than there used to be, because teams are going to 17 instead of 15 players. And so you're not like losing out on developing a kid because you've got Luol Deng on your roster. And I think on a playoff team, I think that he would be valuable to have, or on a team that's kind of in the middle of the pack, that's a playoff team, but like a 5 to 8 level. If you put him on the Timberwolves, you don't think that Thibodeau would have use for Luol Deng? I mean, I'm not saying that the Wolves want him, certainly not at the price he is right now, but I could see him having a spot there. And so now that's more money that you can argue in his favor. And I do think that the Players Union, if the league tried to get in the way of it, I think the Players Union would say, look, this is a guy who's not going to make a lot more money. He has an opportunity to get more money in this may be it for him. How can you get in the way of that? And so that's why you have to throw a little money in Luol Deng's direction. I just don't know how much. We'll have to wait and see how that unfolds. And if the Lakers, if they can trade him, they'll trade him. But I mean, there are reports are saying they've given up on that. I mean, if you can buy him out and stretch him, be it for 5 to 11 years, I think that's the preferable way to go other than shelling out a ton of money paying a team $3 million or $4 million or $5 million to take him, plus a first round pick or two and a good talent, giving up Zubats or Josh Hart or something that a piece that they'd like to keep, doesn't make sense. Might as well just pay out the money.
Yeah, agreed. It does seem like that's the way things are headed, and we'll have to see exactly when it happens. It most likely would be next summer. But yeah, it appears that Luol Deng, his time with the Lakers will probably be up. Of course, if they don't end up landing a major free agent, then there may not be reason to do it. It may be just that they need to wait it out. We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening here. Well, Eric, I think we've covered a ton today. Certainly appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on here and going through all this stuff. Things are definitely heating up as we get closer to the trade deadline. And of course, the Lakers are always an interesting subject to talk about whenever trades are coming up, especially with Magic Johnson and Rob Pelinka at the helm, because you never know what they're going to do. So appreciate you coming on here and giving us your expertise.
All right, Trevor, anytime. Enjoyed it, and always insightful questions. So appreciate you having me on.
And of course, you can find Eric's work on Bleacher Report, Basketball Insiders, and of course, go check out the Hollywood Hoops podcast. Always a great listen. That's going to wrap things up for us today. Next Monday, we normally publish shows on Monday, but that's New Year's Day. So just like this last week, we're going to take that one off, and we'll have a show coming out for you next Thursday. So this show is going to publish on Thursday. So that'll be a week from today that you can hear the next episode of the Lakers Nation podcast. Don't forget, guys, head over to LakersNation.com for all your latest Lakers news, and make sure you head over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to this show. My name's Trevor Lane, and this has been the Lakers Nation podcast. See ya.